before the first hint of dawn crept across the edges of the horizon, before even the blackbirds stirred in the garden hedges. The servants' quarters of the great Edwardian house were already alive with the faint murmurs of another long day. Down below the polished floors and velvet curtains of the family's world, the underworld of work began to wake, quiet, methodical, unseen. The scullery maid was always first. She rose from her narrow bed, where the sheets were still cold from the night, and sat for a brief second in silence, listening to the faraway hum of the sleeping house. Then she reached for her apron, tied it in one swift motion, and felt the familiar sting of chill stone beneath her feet. The corridor was lit by a single lamp, its wick low, casting long golden stripes across the walls where coats and brooms hung like ghosts. She carried her bucket through the narrow passage, the handle biting against her red fingers, and pushed open the heavy door to the kitchen. The smell was familiar: coal, dust, soap, and a trace of last night's stew still clinging to the air. She knelt before the iron range, fingers numb as she arranged the kindling, coaxing the first spark from her trembling match. The tiny flame flickered uncertainly, then grew, catching the dry wood, spreading warmth into the room inch by inch. Behind her, the house was still asleep, and yet every minute down here mattered. By 6, the fires had to be blazing. By 7, the kettles boiling. By 8, breakfast served above stairs as though by magic. One by one, the others emerged from their rooms, a quiet parade of pale faces and drooping eyes, each moving by instinct rather than thought. The butler's shoes clicked sharply on the flagstones as he made his rounds, checking every clock, every corner, ensuring the invisible engine of the household was in perfect order. The housemaids whispered softly to one another as they filled their pails, their breath forming mist in the cold air. Somewhere down the corridor, the footman practiced his posture in the reflection of a copper pot, straightening his shoulders until his frame matched the dignity expected of him. There was no music, no conversation, only the slow hum of routine brushes against boots, the clatter of coal, the sigh of the kettle beginning to hiss. Above them, behind velvet drapes and ivory lamps, the masters slept untouched by time, their dreams undisturbed by the invisible lives beneath their floors. To be a servant in an Edwardian household was to live in this space between silence and necessity, where effort was constant but recognition forbidden. The morning light would soon spill across the lawns, touching the great house with gold, but none of that sunlight reached the servants' hall. Down here, the world glowed only from the fire they had built with their own hands. It was a world that existed solely to ensure another world could remain effortlessly beautiful. As the first bell chimed faintly through the ceiling, calling for tea and warm water, the servants straightened their backs, wiped their hands, and began another day unseen, unheard, indispensable, and quietly fading into the rhythm of a life that belonged entirely to someone else. By the time a thin gray light began to slip through the cracks of the kitchen windows, the servants' quarters had already become a quiet, disciplined storm of activity. The day had taken hold fully now, and each person below stairs had entered the familiar rhythm of endless chores that defined their lives. The scullery maid, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, was bent over a basin of icy water, scrubbing the previous night's dishes until her knuckles turned pink and raw. The footman stood in a neat line before the butler's table, polishing boots and brass buttons until they gleamed with silent pride. Across the corridor, the housemaids moved quickly but softly, carrying pails of water and armfuls of linens, their steps careful not to echo up the staircases that led to the sleeping rooms of the family above. The entire space seemed to hum with purpose, a kind of mechanical harmony created by hands that had repeated the same movements for years. They spoke rarely, if at all. Words were a luxury. Time was not. The house itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with them, each corridor and chamber dependent on their invisible labor. The kitchen was the true heart of the servants' world. The cook stood there like a queen without a throne, her authority absolute, her eyes sharp as she measured flour and gave quiet orders to the scullery girls. Copper pans hung in perfect rows above her, their polished surfaces reflecting the flickering firelight. The smell of boiling oats, baking bread, and wood smoke filled the air in a comforting but heavy cloud. She would prepare 2 breakfasts, one simple and hurried for the servants, and another elaborate, polished, and beautifully presented for the family upstairs. There was no bitterness in it, only routine. It was the natural order of things. The butler moved through the room with slow, deliberate grace, his shoes shining, his cuffs immaculate, his voice low but commanding. He was the conductor of this quiet orchestra of fatigue and duty. Every movement below was in service of what happened above. A teacup placed precisely at 8 minutes past 7. A fire burning evenly in the morning room. The faint scent of lavender soap waiting in the mistress's bath. Outside, the world beyond the estate walls was beginning to wake as well. But it had nothing to do with the order maintained inside this great machine of hierarchy and repetition. The servants did not pause to look out the window at the pale dawn. Their world existed in basements, corridors, and stairwells, places without sunlight. By the time the master's bell rang, announcing that the family had stirred, every trace of the servants' labor would already be erased, leaving behind only the illusion of effortless grace. The dining table would gleam beneath the chandelier, the silverware arranged with mathematical precision, and the scent of fresh flowers would float gently through the air. Not a single guest would ever think of the hands that had polished each fork, scrubbed each floor, or stitched each napkin by candlelight. That was the quiet dignity of service, to make beauty appear without being seen. And so, while the upstairs world awakened to a polished morning, the downstairs one slipped into its next task, already thinking ahead to luncheon, to afternoon tea, to the 1,000 other details that would carry the house to its next night of sleep. For the servants, rest was not a reward. It was only the brief pause between fires to light, boots to shine, and bells that would soon ring again. There was a system beneath the surface of every Edwardian household, silent, unseen, and yet as precise as the gears inside a clock. It was the invisible hierarchy of servants, a structure that defined not only the order of work, but the worth of each person who lived below stairs. No rulebook described it, yet every servant knew exactly where they stood within it. At the very top, like the steady hand that directed all motion, was the butler. His presence alone carried the authority of the master himself. He oversaw the wine cellar, the dining room, and the gentlemen's quarters. His knowledge of etiquette and timing as polished as the silver he guarded. Beneath him were the footmen, young and chosen for their height and posture, trained to move in perfect silence, to anticipate commands before they were spoken. The cook, meanwhile, ruled her domain with equal command, her kitchen a kingdom that no man dared disturb. She answered only to the housekeeper, that grave and quietly powerful woman who held the household together by sheer will and discipline. The housemaids served beneath her, each ranked according to seniority. The head housemaid trusted with the master's rooms, the under-housemaids confined to the endless scrubbing of corridors and staircases, and below even them, unseen by almost all, was the scullery maid, the lowest rung, the one who rose before anyone and slept long after the rest had gone to bed, her hands red and raw from water and soap, her name rarely remembered. This hierarchy was as natural to them as the walls that surrounded their world. They did not question it, for it had existed for centuries, passed down like an unspoken tradition. To challenge it would have been like defying gravity itself. Each servant knew their duties, their place at the table, the exact tone of deference owed to those above. Even their meals reflected the structure. The butler and housekeeper sat at the head of the servants' hall, dining on better portions and finer cutlery, while the lower ranks ate further down, on plainer plates, their talk quieter, their laughter subdued. There was order even in exhaustion, and yet, beneath this strict ladder of rank, there existed a fragile sense of pride, pride in one's role, in the smooth running of the great house, in the unspoken acknowledgement that without them, the grand illusion above would collapse. The servant's world was one of discipline, but also belonging. To fail in one's duty was a personal shame. To perform it perfectly was a quiet triumph no one would ever praise. Sometimes, in the long hours between tasks, a maid might glance up at the ceiling, knowing that just above her head, life was playing out on polished floors, laughter, music, the rustle of silk gowns, the ringing of crystal glasses. But she would lower her eyes again quickly. Those were not her worlds to see. Her own existed in shadow and repetition, governed by rules that had no author and no mercy. Still, there was comfort in the order of it, in the certainty that each day would unfold exactly as the one before. Change was rare, and dreams even rarer. To be a servant was to understand your place so completely that it became invisible, like the air around you, necessary but never noticed. And so the hierarchy continued, unspoken and unbroken, binding together a community of people who worked endlessly for a life that was never truly their own. As the last light of day faded beyond the tall windows of the grand Edwardian house, the air below stairs grew still again, heavy with the soft exhaustion of another day completed. The clock in the servants' hall struck 9, its chime low and tired, echoing faintly down the narrow corridors that wound like veins through the stone heart of the household. Upstairs, the family had retired, the master in his study with the evening paper, the mistress settling beneath a canopy of lace and lamplight, her chamber faintly scented with lavender and polished wood. Below, the servants moved with the same quiet efficiency that had carried them since dawn. But now there was a looseness to their steps, a certain fragile calm that came only when the day was finally ending. The fires were banked carefully to smolder through the night. The silver polished one last time until it gleamed like small moons under the kitchen lamps. The cook stood beside the range, arms folded, eyes soft with fatigue. while the scullery maid scrubbed the final pan in water that had long since turned gray. The butler, methodical as ever, made his rounds, checking that every door was locked, every curtain drawn, every candle extinguished but one. It was his ritual of closure, the act that separated duty from rest, though rest was seldom more than a few hours of uneasy sleep in the dim light. The servants' faces seemed older than their years, carved by repetition and silence. The day's noise had faded. No more clinking glasses, no footsteps overhead, no bells to summon. Only the creak of wood and the faraway whisper of the wind beyond the walls remained. The maids gathered their cleaning cloths, folded them neatly, and placed them in their cupboard as though tucking away pieces of themselves. The footmen unbuttoned their stiff livery coats, their movements slow and weary, voices low as they shared a few final words about the morning's duties to come. Even fatigue had its own decorum here. No one slouched, no one complained loudly. They had learned long ago that the only rebellion left to them was endurance. And yet, beneath the surface of exhaustion, there was a strange serenity in the sameness of it all. To live by routine was to be free of uncertainty. To serve was to belong to something larger than oneself, even if that something never truly saw you. When the butler finally gave his nod of dismissal, the hall emptied slowly. Each servant vanished into their small, cell-like rooms, narrow spaces furnished only with a bed, a washstand, and a faint smell of soap. The scullery maid, always last to sleep, hung her apron on the hook beside the door, her fingers raw, her arms trembling, and yet she smiled faintly as she blew out her lamp. Somewhere above, she knew, the same flame would still be burning in a crystal chandelier, its light falling across velvet drapes and silver-framed mirrors. The two worlds divided by floors and fortune, yet connected by necessity. The silence of night settled deep into the house, wrapping it in stillness. And for a few short hours, all were equal in rest. The servants slept soundly, not because the work was done, but because tomorrow would bring exactly the same. The cycle was endless, predictable, strangely comforting, a life lived in shadows, measured by bells and breath, bound by duty, softened by routine. In the unseen world beneath the grandeur, the servants found a kind of peace that belonged only to them, the quiet satisfaction of a day survived, a task completed, a life that, though hidden, still held meaning in the steady pulse of the house that never truly slept. The Edwardian household was not a single home, but two worlds stacked one upon the other, connected by staircases that carried silence as much as footsteps. Above, sunlight filtered through lace curtains, glinting against silver teapots and embroidered cushions, while below, the air was dim, thick with the scent of soap, coal, and cooked meat. This divide of class was not an accident, but an architecture of society itself, built into every wall, woven into every habit, reinforced by generations of quiet obedience and quiet expectation. To the family above, comfort appeared as though it were the natural order of things, something that simply happened each day with the same certainty as the rising of the sun. But below stairs, every moment of that comfort was measured in labor. The fires that burned brightly in the drawing rooms had been lit by chapped hands before dawn. The gleam of a mirror had been coaxed from an hour's polishing. The shimmer of linen on the table came from water that had blistered a maid's fingers. The two worlds depended on each other completely, and yet their inhabitants lived as though the other were only a faint rumor, a necessary but distant fact. Even the walls of the great house obeyed the law of division. The main staircases, wide and graceful, were reserved for those above, their polished wood unmarked by servants' boots. Hidden behind paneling or tucked in narrow corners ran the servants' stairs, so steep and confining that one could not pass another without pressing close to the wall. Doors were placed in such a way that servants could enter, serve, and vanish without disturbing the illusion of effortlessness that ruled the upstairs world. It was not only a physical boundary, but a spiritual one. To be a servant was to understand that your presence was necessary, but your person was not. A good servant was like air, vital, invisible, and expected never to draw attention to itself. A good master, in turn, was not cruel, but detached, trained by society to see service as something as natural as gravity. Yet, beneath this careful separation, there was a curious intimacy, a strange dependency that neither side could escape. The lady's maid who fastened the mistress's gown each morning knew her employer's body more closely than her husband did. The butler, with his key to the wine cellar and his duty to guard the family silver, knew the household secrets better than the master himself. And though the family might dine in silk and the servants eat in aprons, their lives wound around each other in a quiet, unspoken dance of necessity. Still, the rules were absolute. No laughter too loud, no eye contact too long, no voice raised where it could be heard above stairs. For the servants, self-erasure was survival. For the family, ignorance was decorum. And yet, in the flickering glow of the kitchen fires, whispers sometimes rose, quiet talk of the upstairs world, not with bitterness, but with distant fascination. They spoke of the gowns, the dances, the motor cars, and the visitors whose names filled the gossip columns. Above, the family spoke of loyalty and their good people, as if referring to another species, kind and capable, but forever different. Two worlds, two realities, sharing the same roof, and yet separated by customs so deeply ingrained it seemed eternal. The divide of class was not written in law, but lived in the details of every hour, in the polished boots and whispered replies, in the way one world woke early so the other could dream longer. It was not hatred that kept them apart, but habit, the most unbreakable barrier of all. In every Edwardian household, silver was more than metal. It was status made visible, a mirror through which the family's reputation gleamed for the world to see. Each spoon, each candlestick, each platter reflected not only candlelight, but lineage, wealth, and respectability. Yet the gleam of that silver came from hands that were rarely acknowledged, hands that worked in silence beneath the world that dined and danced above. The butler, guardian of the silver cupboard, treated his collection as though it were sacred. He kept the key on a small chain that rested against his waistcoat, checking it with the precision of a priest before Mass. Each morning, before the family stirred, he would open the cabinet and begin the ritual, unwrapping each piece from its protective cloth, inspecting it under lamplight, running a white-gloved finger across its surface to catch even the faintest trace of dust. The polish, thick and sharp-smelling, was applied in small circles with a soft cloth. The same movement repeated hundreds of times until the silver shone like moonlight trapped in metal. The footmen would stand beside him, heads slightly bowed, working in rhythm. the faint sound of rubbing cloths, forming a whispering chorus in the stillness of dawn. It was exhausting work, yet deeply ceremonial. For the butler, it was not merely cleaning. It was the preservation of the household's dignity. A tarnished spoon was a mark of shame, a dull surface, a personal failure. The silver was a symbol of order, and order in an Edwardian home was everything. When the family entertained, the polished gleam on every utensil spoke silently of their refinement, of a life untouched by labor. No guest at the grand dining table would ever imagine the hours of unseen effort that went into each shining fork. They would see only the illusion, the light glancing perfectly off the curved rim of a goblet, the candlelight dancing across the mirrored surface of the trays. The true beauty of the table was not in its wealth, but in the invisible perfection crafted by the people who would never sit at it. Downstairs, in the servants' hall, the same silver that had dazzled under chandeliers would later be carried back, dulled by fingerprints and gravy stains, and once again the cycle would begin. Cloth against metal, polish against skin. The same careful touch repeated endlessly until the silver regained its brilliance. The servants never saw it as futility. To them, it was duty, a ritual that brought meaning to the monotony. The butler, with his calm authority, ensured the work was done with reverence. His footmen learned to move like clockwork. Each stroke measured, each piece returned to its rightful place with exact precision. And when it was finally done, when the cabinet once more gleamed with silent perfection, the butler would close its door gently, turn the key, and slip it back into his pocket with the same care as a man sealing a treasure chest. Above stairs, laughter would echo faintly through the floorboards, music drifting from the drawing room, unaware of the small victory just achieved below. The house, for all its grandeur, was a theater of illusions, and silver was the most convincing prop. It promised refinement while hiding labor. It reflected beauty while concealing effort. Those who admired it saw only themselves in its polished surface, not the hands that made it shine. And so, each day, the same cycle repeated. Silver tarnished, silver restored, pride renewed, invisibility maintained. In the end, it was not the masters who gave the silver its glow, but the hidden hands that polished it in silence, turning work into ritual and duty into art, until the reflections themselves seemed to whisper stories of those who would never be seen. In an Edwardian household, bells were the heartbeat of service, small, simple instruments of brass and wire that controlled every movement, every pause, every breath taken below stairs. They hung in neat rows along a wall in the servants' corridor, each fitted with a tiny label engraved in fine script: drawing room, morning room, nursery, master's chamber, blue bedroom. When one bell rang, a soft, metallic tremor would ripple through the quiet, and all conversation, all laughter, all thought stopped. The servants had been trained to listen for those sounds the way sailors listen for the sea, instinctively, reverently. A single chime might mean tea was required. 2 quick rings could summon a maid to fetch a shawl or adjust a curtain. The bells did not shout, but their command was absolute. They were the invisible voice of the house, speaking for the unseen masters above. The footman, polishing glassware in the pantry, would straighten immediately. The butler would glance at the trembling bell and give a subtle nod. The appropriate servant would vanish up the stairs at once. Steps swift but silent, face calm, hands folded in readiness. Each bell had its own character, some sharp and impatient, others slow and hesitant. The servants could tell, just by the rhythm, which family member had called. The mistress's ring was crisp and delicate, the master's deeper and more deliberate. The children's bell often danced with restlessness, demanding attention for games or minor mischiefs. And so, from dawn until night, the servants' lives unfolded in the rhythm of those chimes. They dictated meals, errands, and moods. They filled the silence of the basement halls with soft metallic whispers that echoed through every wall. The bells made the house alive, a living organism, pulsing with instruction and obedience for the servants. The sound of bells brought both dread and comfort. They broke the monotony but also denied peace. Even during meals, every ear was trained to listen for that faint metallic flutter that could summon them at any moment. The scullery maid, up to her elbows in suds, might freeze mid-motion when she heard one, heart quickening as she waited to see if it was her call. The footman, though always graceful, could never fully relax, knowing that any instant of laughter or rest might be interrupted by the demanding tinkle that called them back into invisibility. Some grew so accustomed to the bells that they could no longer sleep soundly. In their dreams, the echoes followed them, faint and insistent, like a clock that never stopped ticking. And yet, for all their tyranny, the bells gave structure to life below stairs. Without them, the day would lose its rhythm. The servants' hall would fall into uneasy stillness. The butler, keeper of order, ensured that each bell pull upstairs was perfectly wired, that no call went unanswered, no signal ignored. It was said that a well-run household was one where the bells rang softly and seldom where the master's comfort was so perfectly anticipated that they rarely needed to summon anyone at all. That was the ideal every servant quietly chased, a world where bells existed but did not ring. Still, they did ring, sometimes late at night, when exhaustion weighed heavy and eyes longed for rest. The sound would pierce the stillness, faint but commanding, and somewhere in the dark, a maid would rise again, tying her apron in the half-light, her bare feet whispering across the floor. Above her, the grand rooms slept easily, unaware that a single bell had stirred the world below. In every Edwardian house, the master's table stood not only as a place to eat, but as a stage upon which the entire household's order was displayed. It was where wealth became visible, where manners were rehearsed, and where silence itself seemed to take on elegance. Each evening, before the family entered the dining room, an invisible army below stairs prepared the ritual that transformed the simple act of supper into ceremony. The table was long and polished to a deep, warm glow, its mahogany surface reflecting the faint shimmer of gaslight and crystal. The footman, dressed in liveried coats and gloves, white as snow, moved in practiced silence as they laid out each piece with mathematical precision. The butler stood at the head, eyes keen, ensuring that every glass was placed exactly 1 inch from the edge, every napkin folded to perfect symmetry. He checked the silver, the candles, the flowers, every detail, a wordless expression of the house's dignity. Above all, he understood that the table must never betray the labor behind it. The illusion of effortlessness was as essential as the meal itself. When the family entered, time seemed to slow. Chairs were pulled out soundlessly, the clink of porcelain softened by thick carpets and gloved hands. Conversation began in low, polite tones. Talk of weather, society events, perhaps the latest letter from a relative abroad. The master would unfold his napkin with deliberate grace. The mistress might lift her glass just enough for the chandelier to catch its light. To the casual eye, it was all simplicity and charm. But behind each small motion lay 100 unseen gestures performed earlier that day. The polishing, the washing, the ironing, the waiting. The soup served steaming hot had been simmering for hours in the kitchens below, tended by the cook and her assistants in an air thick with heat and fatigue. The wine that flowed so easily had been selected and decanted in silence by the butler, who knew precisely when to refill a glass and when to disappear like a shadow. The rhythm of the meal was a dance, choreographed to perfection, and each servant knew his steps by heart. To the family, dinner was comfort, perhaps even monotony. To the servants, it was theater, a delicate balance between precision and invisibility. A single mistake, a dropped spoon, or an ill-timed movement could shatter the illusion that fear lived in every heartbeat, yet so did a kind of pride. When the plates gleamed and the candles burned steadily, when every guest left satisfied and unbothered, it was victory, quiet, unspoken, but deeply felt. After the family withdrew to the drawing room for coffee and brandy, the servants would clear the table in near silence. The grandeur would vanish within minutes. Tablecloths folded, silver returned to its case. The lingering scent of roasted meat replaced by the earthy smell of soap and polish. The footman might exchange a brief smile of relief, a shared glance that said, "Another dinner survived." And then, when the house fell quiet again, the same table that had hosted refinement and laughter would stand alone in the half-dark, reflecting only the dying light of the candles. It was strange, in a way, that the same surface which witnessed elegance above also bore the weight of weary hands below. But that was the truth of the Edwardian home. Every grace was balanced upon hidden effort. The master's table was not merely furniture. It was a mirror of the society itself, polished above, worn beneath, beautiful from afar, and endlessly maintained by those who were never meant to sit there. When the last light above stairs dimmed and the heavy doors were drawn shut, the house exhaled. The grand rooms that only hours ago had glittered with laughter and crystal now stood hushed, their mirrors holding the faint ghosts of movement. The smell of roast and candle wax still lingered, curling through the air like memory. For the family, the evening had ended in comfort, slippers by the hearth, soft conversation, perhaps a final page turned before the lamp was extinguished. But for the servants below, the night was only just beginning its final act. The kitchen still glowed faintly from the embers in the range. Dishes stacked like a small fortress waited to be washed, dried, and put away in precise order. The scullery maid worked with sleeves rolled and eyes half closed, her hands moving by habit rather than thought, each plate and pan vanishing into its proper place. Around her, the great house murmured the sound of footsteps fading, the soft creak of boards settling, the rhythmic tick of the clock in the servants' hall marking the slow surrender of the day. The butler made his final rounds with the gravity of a priest closing a church. He checked that every candle was snuffed, every lock secured, every window fastened against the night air. The silver cupboard was locked, with its familiar click, the key slipping once more into his pocket, where it rested like a token of duty fulfilled. In the pantry, the footmen folded their livery coats, brushing away a trace of lint that no one would ever see. For, in this world, even rest required precision. The housemaids climbed the narrow back stairs, their skirts whispering along the walls, pausing only to straighten a rug or adjust a curtain before retreating to their rooms beneath the eaves. There, under low ceilings and faint lamplight, they loosened the ties of the day pins from hair, laces from boots, and sat for a moment in silence, listening to the world above settle into dreams. In those quiet minutes before sleep, the servants belonged briefly to themselves. Some wrote a letter home in cramped handwriting, telling of wages earned or a new baby brother born far away. Others simply stared at the small flame of a candle and let their minds drift over the day's endless tasks. Outside, the wind brushed against the stone walls, carrying the scent of rain and earth from the gardens. Inside, the house seemed to listen to itself, pipes sighing, timbers shifting, the faint echo of a door closing somewhere far away. The masters slept, unaware that below them life still stirred gently, ensuring that morning would arrive in perfect order. By the time the last servant lay down, the horizon had begun to pale. Another day was already waiting, hidden in the folds of dawn. Soon, the same hands that had scrubbed, polished, and carried would rise again to relight the fires, reheat the water, and breathe movement back into the silent house. But for a few fragile hours, the world held still, a rare equality, where both upstairs and downstairs lay wrapped in the same quiet dark. In that stillness, the house felt almost human, as though it too needed to rest from the demands of order and appearance. And as the final candle was pinched out, the servants' quarters sank into darkness, the air heavy with peace and fatigue. Above, the moonlight slid across the polished floorboards of the dining room, touching the master's table one last time before vanishing into shadow. Thus the night returned the house to itself, polished and weary, beautiful and burdened, waiting patiently for the sound of footsteps and bells that would, with merciless grace, begin it all again. Before dawn had even considered brushing the edges of the sky, the first sounds began in the world beneath the house. A door creaked open, the faint shuffle of slippered feet touched the cold flagstones, and somewhere in the dark a match struck. For a moment, the spark lit the scullery maid's face, pale, still marked by sleep, and then faded into the trembling glow of a candle. The air down there was always colder than anywhere else, heavy with the damp scent of stone, coal dust, and soap. She moved softly through the quiet, as though not to wake the bones of the great house itself, her breath visible in the faint light. The range needed lighting first. It was her duty, every morning, without fail. She crouched low, stacking kindling and coal with the care of a ritual learned by repetition rather than thought. When the fire caught, it spoke in tiny crackles, filling the room with warmth and promise. Outside, the world remained in darkness, but below stairs, morning had already begun to turn. The others would follow soon, the kitchen maid, the footman, the housemaids, all with eyes half open, but hands already busy. Each knew their task, and none required instruction. The house below stairs worked like machinery, each person a cog that turned smoothly, quietly, so that above stairs could begin their day in comfort. Buckets were filled, fires laid, curtains drawn open in rooms that still slept. The smell of baking bread began to drift faintly through the passageways, mingling with the metallic temps of freshly polished pots. The cook's voice, low but commanding, began to echo faintly from the kitchen. She was the sun of this hidden world, steady, formidable, the keeper of the house's first warmth. Orders were given with the certainty of ritual: eggs to be boiled, tea leaves to be measured, trays to be prepared for the master and mistress. As the first fingers of sunlight finally reached the high windows above, the servants were already several hours deep into their labor. The house glowed faintly from within, lamps lit, fires burning, the machinery of domestic order humming unseen. Upstairs, in the great bedrooms, draped with heavy curtains, the family slept still, unaware of the quiet ballet being performed below them. Boots were polished until they shone, breakfast china laid out in perfect symmetry. Even the air was prepared, warmed by coals and scented faintly with tea. The butler appeared at last, measured and precise, his presence signaling that the invisible engine of the morning was running exactly as it should. He inspected the trays, nodded once, and vanished up the servants' staircase to deliver the first sign of life to the world above. A silver tray bearing steaming tea and folded newspapers to those who lived below stairs. The morning was not something they witnessed, it was something they created. Every day began not with sunrise, but with action, heat, and noise hidden beneath civility. Their reward was not recognition, but the quiet satisfaction of routine completed before others even stirred. The house, like a giant organism, woke from the bottom up, and by the time the first bell rang from above, gentle, commanding, inevitable, everything was already in its place. The fires burned, the bread baked, the linens smoothed. The house was ready to pretend that it had always been awake, waiting politely for its masters to rise. When the first tray of tea had been carried upstairs, the house entered a new kind of quiet, not the silence of sleep, but the hush of precision. The butler, that calm axis around which all order turned, had already begun his morning ritual. To watch him move was to see a clock in human form, every gesture deliberate, measured, unhurried. He walked through the service corridor with polished shoes that made no sound, inspecting the work that had been done before he even appeared. His world was one of discipline, keys, lists, and quiet authority. The young footman, still nervous in his new livery, stood straighter when the butler passed. He knew that a single glance could reveal what words never needed to say. A smudge missed, a shoe unpolished, a tray slightly out of line. The butler did not scold often because he did not have to. His very presence carried weight, a reminder that perfection was expected, not requested. The morning bells began soon after, soft but insistent. The panel on the servants' wall, lined with brass and wire, trembled with tiny movements as one bell after another signaled the awakening of the world above. Master's room, nursery, morning room, each ring meant a task, each vibration an instruction. The butler listened as though to music, recognizing the pattern, the rhythm of the household's needs. A long single ring, the mistress calling for hot water. 2 short rings, the children awake and requiring help with their clothes. He nodded once, quietly directing the footmen and maids with nothing more than a look or a tilt of the head. The bells never startled him. He lived in their rhythm, translating their commands into motion. As he ascended the narrow servants' staircase, tray in hand, the air changed cooler, scented faintly with lavender and polish. Upstairs, the light was softer, filtered through gauzy curtains. He paused before the door, knocked gently, and entered with the grace of someone who had done this hundreds of times. The mistress's tea was placed on her bedside table, the silver gleaming, the china delicate as breath. He spoke little. A soft "good morning, ma'am" was enough. His job was not conversation, it was presence, dependable and discreet. After setting the tray, he retreated as silently as he came, vanishing down the passage before the first real words of the day were spoken above stairs. Below, the bells still murmured. The footman hurried to deliver water jugs. The maids climbed and descended with armfuls of linens, and in the kitchen, the cook shouted instructions over the hiss of boiling kettles. But the butler's pace never changed. He floated through the bustle like a conductor through an orchestra, hearing harmony where others heard noise. His eyes caught every detail, a crooked picture frame, a fingerprint on polished wood, and without a word, he would correct it or have it corrected. Order was his duty, but dignity was his art to him. The household was not chaos restrained, but elegance achieved through constant, invisible effort. By the time the family gathered for breakfast, the butler stood once more in his rightful place near the dining room door, hands clasped lightly behind his back. The bells had quieted now, their music replaced by the soft clinking of silver and porcelain. He would remain there, vigilant yet unseen, ensuring that every need was met before it could even be expressed. To those above stairs, the day had simply unfolded, seamless, effortless, inevitable. But below, the butler and his bells had composed it, note by note, each ring answered, each motion timed to perfection. And when the last cup was poured, he allowed himself a small, private thought that the world, for now, was perfectly in tune. While the butler moved with polished calm, the maids worked in a blur of quiet motion, the unseen breeze that swept through the house, bringing life to stillness and warmth to cold rooms. Their day began when the stars were still visible through the narrow panes of their attic windows, when the air was so cold that breath hung like mist. By the time the faintest gray light began to touch the sky, they were already deep in their work, skirts brushing the floors, hands reddened by soap and water. The head housemaid led them, her voice low but firm, giving quiet orders as they spread across the grand house like a tide of order and endurance. They knew every corridor, every stair, every creak of every floorboard. They moved through the labyrinth of rooms with practiced precision, carrying dusters, coal scuttles, brushes, and buckets, the tools of their unseen craft. Their first duty was the fireplaces. Before the masters awoke, every grate had to be emptied, cleaned, and relaid with fresh coal. It was dirty, heavy work. Soot clung to the air and to their skin, black dust catching in their hair and clothes. Yet they performed it with care, leaving not a trace of ash behind. When the fires finally crackled to life, they lit the rooms with the illusion of effortless comfort, as though warmth were something that simply existed rather than something earned by aching hands at dawn. Next came the beds, sheets smoothed, blankets turned, pillows shaken until plump and perfect. They worked in silence, speaking only when necessary, listening instead to the muffled sounds above a cough, a door opening, the first bell calling softly through the walls. Each sound meant the day was advancing, and their pace adjusted accordingly. They learned through repetition the delicate choreography of invisibility. A maid could enter a room moments before her mistress did, open curtains, and retreat down a back passage unseen, to appear at the wrong moment, to be noticed without purpose, was to break the invisible boundary that separated servant from service. And so, their world existed in the pauses, the breaths between bells, the fleeting moments before the household truly awoke. Their skill was not only in cleaning, but in timing to vanish, just as footsteps approached, to finish a task just before it was needed, to make comfort seem spontaneous. Sometimes, in the quietest rooms, they allowed themselves a moment to breathe. Perhaps it was while straightening a vase, or dusting the edge of a bookshelf, or standing by a freshly polished mirror that reflected a face they hardly recognized beneath its fatigue. They did not speak of dreams often, but in those brief pauses, a maid might think of home, of the countryside, of a morning where she could rise without hurry. Then the thought would fade, replaced by the rhythm of duty. Downstairs, the cook's voice might echo faintly, summoning them for breakfast service, and they would descend again into the hum of the lower world, laughter returning, chatter rising like the first song of birds. By the time the family descended for breakfast, the maid's work had already transformed the house completely. The fires burned bright, the carpets held no dust, and the very air felt fresh. The masters would never know the hour it took to make a single room gleam, or how many footsteps it required to maintain their illusion of effortless grace. But that was the pride of the maids, to make perfection appear natural. For them, the morning was not a beginning, but a performance, repeated endlessly, invisible to all but themselves, and as essential to the house as the walls that held it upright. By the time the clocks upstairs struck 8, the servants' world was already deep into its second wind. The scent of coffee and buttered toast drifted softly through the corridors, wrapping itself around the quiet hum of polished order. Breakfast, though the simplest of meals, was a performance in itself, a measured harmony of timing, presentation, and silence. The kitchen below had come alive hours earlier. The cook, sturdy and commanding, presided like a general before battle, her sleeves rolled and apron immaculate despite the chaos around her. Eggs hissed in the pan, sausages crackled over the flame. The steady rhythm of knives against wooden boards filled the air. Each dish was prepared with care, not because anyone below would taste it, but because perfection was the only acceptable standard for the plates that would grace the table. Above Dot, the footmen moved swiftly between the kitchen and pantry, their boots whispering against the flagstones. One carried the toast rack, silver, polished until it gleamed, while another poured coffee into delicate china pots painted with tiny blue flowers. The butler appeared only briefly, checking each detail with his steady, silent gaze. A folded napkin slightly misaligned, a spoon a fraction too close to the saucer. All would be corrected with a gentle hand before the tray departed. When everything was arranged in its precise order, the first footman would ascend the servants' staircase, careful not to let the china rattle. The door to the breakfast room opened like a curtain on a play that had already begun countless times before. Upstairs, the world felt different, warmer, softer, bathed in pale morning light. The master sat behind his newspaper, spectacles perched low on his nose, while the mistress gazed out the window, her teacup resting lightly in her hand. Their conversation was polite and minimal, punctuated only by the rustle of paper or the faint clink of a spoon. "A pleasant day, I think," she might murmur, and he would nod without looking up. To an observer, it might seem peaceful, even dull, but to the servants it was the most delicate of hours. The footman stood poised, ready to refill, to replace, to disappear. Every movement was quiet and controlled. A door creaked too loudly and was met with a sharp glance. A single drop of coffee spilled, and hearts tightened until the butler's calm nod restored the fragile rhythm. Meanwhile, below stairs, the kitchen cooled slowly, the fire's heat fading into the stone walls. The maids cleaned and stacked plates that would soon be dirtied again for luncheon. The scullery girl worked in her corner, arms deep in soapy water, her world far removed from the quiet civility of the breakfast room above. Yet even here, there was a sense of satisfaction that the house was running as it should, that every sound, scent, and step aligned perfectly with the invisible expectations of those upstairs. Breakfast was, in truth, the pulse of the day. Once it passed smoothly, the rest would follow in its rhythm. When the meal ended, the butler led the silent procession to clear the table. The family moved to the drawing room, leaving behind only the faint scent of coffee and toast. The chairs were straightened, the crumbs swept, the silver carried away for polishing once more. The sunlight had fully claimed the house now, glowing gently on the polished wood and white tablecloths. Downstairs, the servants finally paused for their own breakfast, plain bread and tea, laughter hushed but genuine. For a few moments, they could rest before the next bell called them again to motion. Above, the master folded his paper, the mistress reached for her embroidery, and the world continued, one half of it seen, the other half always unseen, yet both bound by the same ticking of time. By mid-morning, the grand house had shaken off the hush of dawn and settled into its steady, dignified rhythm, alive, but never hurried. The air itself seemed to hum with quiet purpose. Above stairs, sunlight filtered through lace curtains, laying soft golden patterns across the carpets. The drawing room filled with the faint rustle of fabric as the mistress arranged fresh flowers brought in from the garden, her movements deliberate, her posture perfect. Somewhere down the hall, the master's voice carried faintly from his study, as he spoke to a visiting gentleman about estate accounts, his tone polite but clipped. The house had entered its daytime state, composed, efficient, orderly, but beneath the surface, an entire, invisible machinery continued to turn, keeping the illusion alive. Below stairs, the pulse of labor remained constant. The clatter of pots from the kitchen mingled with the rhythmic thump of ironing upstairs. The maids, having finished their early cleaning, now tended to the smaller, endless details, dusting the banisters again, checking for fingerprints on the mirrors, adjusting the drapes so that every fold fell perfectly straight. The laundry maid worked in a haze of steam, her arms moving steadily over crisp linen, while the kitchen maids peeled vegetables for luncheon, their chatter soft and rhythmic. Every sound had its place, every person their task. It was a symphony of quiet endurance, hundreds of movements, woven together to sustain the seamless calm that reigned above. The butler made his rounds with measured steps, inspecting the dining room, adjusting the clock by a minute, and ensuring that the silver for luncheon gleamed without a single dull spot. His eyes missed nothing: a flower wilting slightly in a vase, a servant's apron not tied correctly, a misplaced cushion. With a nod or a quiet word, he restored balance. He carried himself as if the dignity of the entire house rested upon his posture, and, in a sense, it did. Every servant below understood that the butler was not just a man, but a symbol of the household's character. His calm steadiness reflected upon them all. Upstairs, the family's day unfolded at its own unhurried pace. The mistress hosted a brief meeting with her housekeeper to discuss the week's menus and the arrival of guests for the weekend. Together, they walked through the rooms, the mistress offering small remarks, perhaps lilies in the guest room, or the tea service should be the gold-rimmed one on Sunday. The housekeeper listened, noting every detail in her ledger. Her mind was a map of the household's order: what was due to be laundered, who needed new uniforms, which servant's mother had fallen ill. She knew everything, remembered everything, and yet, like the butler, appeared almost invisible in her precision. By 11, the scent of freshly baked bread drifted through the corridors, mingling with beeswax and coal smoke. The day had settled into its pattern, serene, repetitive, eternal. It was a world powered by habit, sustained by discipline, softened by ritual. To an outsider, it might have seemed monotonous, even lifeless. But to those who lived it, there was comfort in the repetition, a sense that each task, however small, held meaning because it belonged to something larger than themselves. When a maid folded a towel just so, or when the butler polished the silver until it reflected his face like a mirror, they were not merely working, they were preserving a tradition, maintaining a fragile order in a world that was already beginning to change beyond the gates. As the clock struck noon, the house exhaled, a moment of pause before the demands of luncheon began. The light had shifted now, fuller and warmer, settling over the polished furniture like a blessing. Above, the master turned another page of his newspaper. Below, the kitchen maids prepared the next course. And in every quiet corner, from attic to cellar, the Edwardian house breathed in rhythm, a living organism of grace, labor, and unspoken devotion, perfectly awake at last. When the breakfast trays were cleared, the fire grates swept, and the silver returned to its place, the house slipped into that strange, suspended calm that came between the morning's chaos and the afternoon's obligations. The bells were mostly still now, their brass mouths glinting softly in the lamplight of the servants' hall, as though resting after a long concert. Above stairs, the family retreated into their private routines, the master to his study, the mistress to her writing desk, the children to their lessons. To the servants below, this lull was not quite rest, but a different kind of labor, slower, quieter, but still exacting. It was the time for the finishing touches, the polishing of what had already been polished, the folding of what had already been folded. In the sunlight spilled through a small, high window, catching the steam that rose from the basins where the scullery maid worked tirelessly. Her hands were red and rough from the morning's washing, yet she moved without complaint. Around her, the sounds of domestic life continued, the faint hum of bees beyond the open door, the rhythmic creak of the laundry mangle, the distant clink of china being stacked. In these quiet hours, the servants found small spaces for thought. Some hummed softly to themselves as they worked old songs from the countryside or hymns half remembered from childhood. The great house, once echoing with footsteps and orders, now murmured like a giant creature resting, breathing gently through its hundreds of rooms. The upper floors, in contrast, glowed with calm refinement. The mistress's writing desk was set by the window, her quill scratching faintly as she composed letters on thick, cream-colored paper. Perhaps she wrote to a sister in London, or to a friend in Bath, or perhaps only to the milliner who would soon send her new ribbons for her gowns. The housemaid, silent as ever, stood nearby, waiting to deliver the notes once sealed with wax. Outside, the gardens shimmered in the late morning light, roses heavy with bloom, the lawns still damp from dew. For the mistress, it was a time of small pleasures, correspondence, embroidery, the quiet reading of poetry before luncheon downstairs. The cook's voice occasionally broke the silence, calling out instructions to the kitchen maids. Mind the sauce, not too thick. Or leave the roast to rest, girl. Her domain was one of heat and motion, but even here the tempo had slowed. The hardest work of the morning was over, and she allowed herself a brief moment to sit, wiping her brow with the edge of her apron. The kitchen, though filled with the smells of herbs and simmering broth, felt almost peaceful now, a place where duty and routine met comfort and pride. These quiet hours were both a blessing and a test. It was the time when fatigue crept in, the aching feet, the stinging hands, the weight of long hours already worked and longer ones yet to come. But they carried on, bound by habit and pride, by the rhythm that governed every minute of the Edwardian day. To stop would be to fall behind, and to fall behind meant to draw attention, the one thing no servant wished for. So they kept at their tasks, polishing, pressing, preparing, until the sound of the next bell reminded them that the calm had ended and another wave of service was about to begin. Dot, above and below, the house breathed in unison, one half drowsing in comfort, the other keeping it alive. And as the sun climbed higher, spilling through the tall windows and setting the dust motes, dancing in its light, it seemed, for just a moment, that time itself had slowed, held in place by the grace and labor of those unseen hands that made the house so quietly, perfectly alive. By noon, the grand clock in the hall began its low, deliberate chime, each note echoing softly through the corridors like a command. It was the sound that stirred both worlds, the signal that luncheon, the most ceremonious meal of the day, was approaching. For the family above, it was a pleasant ritual, the heart of the afternoon. For the servants below, it was a test of precision, speed, and grace. The kitchen, which had spent the late morning in gentle, simmering calm, now pulsed with renewed energy. The cook barked orders across the warmth and steam, her cheeks flushed from the ovens, her eyes sharp despite the hours already behind her. Platters gleamed under the lamplight, their contents carefully arranged, roast meats glistening with glaze, vegetables trimmed into near-perfect shapes, sauces stirred until smooth as silk. The kitchen maids worked like clockwork figures in a well-oiled machine. One basted the joint, another fetched dishes from the scullery, and a third checked the pudding, steaming quietly on the range. Each knew her place, her rhythm, her duty. The butler entered only once, clipboard in hand, to inspect the trays and ensure that every plate was arranged in proper order. Soup, fish, roast, pudding, cheese. He touched nothing, yet somehow corrected everything with a single look. When satisfied, he gave a slow nod, and the footman lifted the heavy trays, carrying them upstairs with the steady grace that came from long practice. Their footsteps fell like whispers on the stairs, the silver lids trembling faintly but never rattling. Upstairs, the luncheon room glowed with soft light. The curtains had been drawn just enough to let the sun fall gently across the table, where crystal and china shimmered like frost. The mistress had changed her gown to something lighter, silk catching the light as she moved. The master stood near the window, adjusting his cuffs before sitting. When they finally took their places, the butler gave a discreet bow, and the meal began in near silence. Conversation was polite, muted a few words about the weather, the new horse, the upcoming visit from the neighbors. For them, luncheon was not hunger's answer, but society's routine, a daily reaffirmation of civility and grace. Every movement of service was part of a wordless ballet. A footman approached with wine, pouring just to the right level before retreating to precise steps. The butler replaced the dish covers with quiet mastery, each gesture smooth, practiced, invisible. The air carried the faint scents of roasted herbs, coffee, and freshly cut flowers. Nothing broke the spell. No cough, no stumble, no misplaced sound. Below stairs, however, the tension was constant. The kitchen maids waited anxiously for the empty plates to return, watching the dumbwaiter as if it held their fates. A dish sent back to cold, a sauce curdled, a complaint from above. Any could mean reprimand or worse. Yet when the trays finally returned, scraped clean and barely marked, the cook allowed herself a small, weary smile. For the servants' luncheon meant both exhaustion and relief. It was the midpoint of their day, a reminder that they had survived the hardest hours and still had more to give. Once the dining room was cleared, the maids moved in to reset the room, wiping every surface until the scent of polish replaced that of food. Downstairs, the footmen finally removed their gloves, and the cook sat with a cup of tea, eyes half closed, but mind still racing ahead to supper. The house fell quiet again, caught in the brief pause between duties. Above stairs, the family retired to the drawing room for tea or correspondence, unaware that below them, the quiet hum of life continued, steady, unseen, unending. After luncheon, the house entered that long, drowsy stretch of day when time itself seemed to slow down, softened by sunlight and silence. The mistress, now free from the formalities of the table, retreated into her private rhythm, the slow unfolding of an Edwardian afternoon. Her footsteps echoed gently down the wide corridor, where the scent of beeswax and roses lingered. In her drawing room, lace curtains swayed faintly with the summer breeze, their edges glowing like spun gold in the light. This was her sanctuary, a room of gentle colors, filled with books, embroidery frames, and fresh flowers changed daily by the maids. Here, the weight of the household lifted just enough for her to breathe, to think, to feel something beyond the endless courtesy that defined her role. A tray of tea awaited her delicate china cups, thin slices of lemon, a plate of small buttered cakes arranged like jewels. The parlor maid, silent and precise, set everything in place before vanishing down the corridor without a sound. The mistress poured her tea herself, savoring the quiet clink of porcelain and the soft hiss of liquid. Outside, the garden shimmered in the afternoon sun. She watched the gardener tending the rose bushes, his figure moving slowly through the flowers. For a while, she allowed herself the luxury of stillness, the kind of pause the servants below could never afford. Yet, even in her peace, duty lingered. She had correspondence to attend to, charitable committees to write about, letters to answer from relatives and acquaintances. Her pen moved steadily over thick paper, looping gracefully across words that were polite but rarely personal. The Edwardian mistress was not idle. Her world was simply framed differently. Her tasks were social rather than physical, subtle rather than strenuous, but the weight of expectation was just as heavy. Every decision, from the arrangement of flowers to the tone of a thank you note, reflected not just her taste, but her husband's status, her household's reputation, and her family's name. Sometimes, in the softer hours, she turned to her embroidery or the piano, letting the music drift lightly through the still air. The melodies were old and faintly wistful, fragments of a youth that seemed further away each year. Her thoughts wandered to her children upstairs with their governess, to her husband behind his study door, to the endless cycle of meals, visits, and letters that shaped her days. There was comfort in the repetition, but also a quiet ache, an awareness that her life, though comfortable, was not entirely her own. The walls around her were beautiful, but they were also boundaries. Downstairs, the servants could hear the faint notes of her piano through the floorboards. It was a sound that drifted between worlds, neither command nor conversation, but a moment of shared humanity in a house otherwise divided by class and silence. For a few minutes, even the maids slowed their pace, listening as they polished, folded, or swept. The melody ended softly, like a sigh, and the rhythm of the house resumed, the dull thud of doors, the muted hum of voices, the far-off clatter of dishes being prepared for afternoon tea as the sun began to dip lower in the sky. The mistress set aside her embroidery, folded her letters, and rang the bell for her maid. There would soon be preparations for the evening, a change of gown, a small meal, perhaps guests to receive. The moment of peace was over, but she carried its quietness with her, the steady calm that allowed her to move through the performance of her life with grace. Above and below, the great house stirred once more, gathering itself for the long hours ahead. When the mistress's piano fell silent and the bells above paused their music, a different kind of quiet descended through the house, not the heavy stillness of sleep, but the soft exhale of weary bodies catching their breath below stairs. The servants took their briefest of respites, a narrow window of peace carved out of endless duty. In the servants' hall, the air was warm and faintly scented with soap, tea, and the last traces of luncheon. The maids sat in their plain wooden chairs, hands resting for the first time since dawn. Their laughter, small and tired, filled the low-ceilinged room like candlelight, fragile but alive. The cook sat nearest the range, her apron smudged with flour, her cheeks still pink from the kitchen's heat. She held a cup of tea in both hands, savoring it as though it were a luxury she might not be offered again. The scullery maid, the youngest of them all, perched on the edge of a stool, boots untied, fingers red and chapped from scrubbing. She listened more than she spoke, eyes wide as the older maids told small stories of families far away, of dances long past, of summers before service had swallowed their lives whole. These moments were their only glimpse of themselves, beyond the uniform, beyond the unending commands. Here, for 10, maybe 15 minutes, they were not just servants. They were girls, women, friends. The butler never joined them, of course. He took his rest alone in his small office near the wine cellar, where order lived even in silence. Yet he, too, allowed himself a quiet sigh as he removed his gloves and flexed his hands. His rest was not idleness, it was reflection, the still center that kept the machinery of the household running smoothly. He thought of the accounts too, balance the inventories to update, the supplies to order before the next week began. Even in his stillness, duty whispered like an old friend he could never quite put aside. For the maids, the rest was physical, the relief of not standing, not rushing, not answering bells. Some leaned their heads against the cool wall, eyes closed for just a moment. One hummed softly under her breath, a tune from home, while another stitched a tear in her apron with quick, practiced hands. Outside, through the narrow window, sunlight slanted across the gravel yard, gilding the air with gold dust. It was beautiful, though few of them noticed. Beauty was a luxury their lives rarely allowed them time to admire. But the peace never lasted long. A distant bell would sound faint but undeniable, and the stillness would shatter like glass. Cups were set down, chairs pushed back, and voices faded into silence. The rhythm of service resumed without hesitation, as though the rest had never been. The cook returned to her stove, the maids to their brooms and linens, the footmen to their trays and doors. The scullery maid sighed softly as she plunged her hands once more into the basin, steam rising like a ghost around her face. And yet, there was no bitterness in their return, only endurance, a quiet acceptance built from years of repetition, of doing what must be done without complaint. When the hall emptied again, only the faint warmth of their laughter lingered in the air, mingling with the fading scent of tea. For a moment, the great house above and the humble world below felt almost the same, both resting between movements, both waiting for evening. And though no one spoke it aloud, each servant carried something from that small pause, a fragment of strength, a whisper of humanity, enough to see them through the long hours yet to come. The peace never lasted, it never did. Even before the tea in the servants' hall cooled, the faint, metallic trill of a bell would sound from the corridor, soft, distant, but unmistakable. The maids froze for half a heartbeat, eyes meeting in silent recognition. Then, with the precision of instinct, the pause was over. Chairs scraped quietly, aprons were straightened, and the slow hum of the household awoke once more. The bells had returned. Their chime, though small, carried power, the voice of the house itself calling its people back to motion. Each bell on the board had its own identity: morning room, drawing room, nursery, guest chamber. The servants knew them all by sound. To the untrained ear, they might have seemed identical, a faint metallic vibration. But to those below stairs, each bell sang in its own distinct note, a language of duty and precision. The butler stood before the panel, hands clasped lightly behind his back, eyes moving as the small brass tongues trembled in their sockets. One bell rang twice in rapid succession, the mistress likely calling for her maid, or perhaps for tea. Another rang once, paused. Then again the master, needing something from his study. The butler gave calm, wordless instructions. Mary, upstairs. George, to the drawing room. The quiet hum of obedience followed instantly. The maids moved quickly, but never ran. Their steps were measured, their faces composed. The goal was not merely to serve, but to serve invisibly, to appear as though they had been waiting just beyond the door all along. Upstairs, the rooms had begun to stir with the gentle energy of afternoon. The mistress was preparing for callers, the master for his ride. Tea had to be laid in the drawing room, flowers refreshed, fires coaxed back to life against the approaching evening chill. The sound of footsteps echoed through the halls like a soft heartbeat, steady, familiar, endless. In the kitchen, the cook returned to her stove with a sigh, her earlier rest already fading into memory. She gave quick orders to her assistants. Polish the silver tray, mind the crumbs on the scones. The scullery maid fetched clean cups from the basin, drying them with the same worn towel she had used since morning. The scent of baking filled the air again, warm and comforting, but tinged with exhaustion. Above them, the bell rang once more, brisk and expectant. "They'll be wanting tea early today," the cook muttered, though no one answered. They didn't need to. The rhythm of duty had begun again. The butler, immaculate as ever, oversaw the preparation of the tea tray. Every element was precisely arranged. The gleaming teapot, the sugar bowl, the tiny silver tongs, the plate of lemon slices arranged in perfect symmetry. To the family upstairs, it would seem effortless, a small pleasure, a quiet custom. But behind that calm display lay countless motions, countless moments of labor. When the footman carried the tray up the stairs, he did so with the silent dignity of ritual. Every step, every gesture, was part of the great choreography that sustained the household's illusion of serenity. By the time the tea reached the drawing room, the bells had fallen silent once more. The family spoke softly above laughter, conversation, the gentle clink of cups. Below stairs, the servants listened to the fading echoes, knowing another round of bells could come at any moment. Their rest was over, but their purpose had returned. The rhythm of the house was restored, predictable, unchanging, eternal. The day, though far from finished, settled into its steady heartbeat once again. And as the light outside began to soften toward evening, the servants worked on, guided by the gentle tyranny of the bells, until the house itself seemed to hum with quiet, graceful obedience. Evening crept through the Edwardian house like a soft sigh, gentle, deliberate, and full of ritual. The last traces of daylight stretched across the long corridors, turning the wallpaper gold for a moment. Upstairs, the drawing room lamps were being lit one by one, their glow softening the edges of the grand furniture and casting a warm, honey-colored light over the silk curtains. Below stairs, the servants moved in quiet synchronization, preparing for the next chapter of the day, that delicate bridge between duty and darkness. When the household shed the dust of the afternoon and dressed itself anew for the evening, the housemaids began with the hearths. One by one, they knelt before the fireplaces, clearing the old ashes, laying fresh logs, striking matches that hissed softly before catching. The flames rose and danced, filling the air with the faint crackle of warmth. As they worked, the faint chiming of the clock drifted down the staircase. 6 o'clock. Time was everything here. The rhythm of each life ticked in precise harmony with it. Upstairs, the mistress was being dressed for dinner. Her lady's maid, quiet and efficient, laid out the gown. Layers of silk in deep mauve, the color of twilight, with delicate beading that shimmered when she moved. The mistress stood before her mirror as the maid fastened each button, neither speaking much, a familiar silence that needed no breaking dot in the master's dressing room. A similar ritual unfolded. The valet prepared the evening clothes, black tailcoat, crisp white shirt, starched collar. The sound of fabric brushing against fabric filled the still air as the master adjusted his cufflinks, eyes briefly meeting his own reflection. Downstairs, the butler supervised the setting of the dining table. The great mahogany gleamed beneath the soft gaslight, polished so perfectly that the silver candlesticks reflected in its surface like small, steady stars. The table was a masterpiece of symmetry, crystal glasses aligned, folded napkins crisp as parchment, every plate precisely centered. The cook sent up the first whiff of roasted meat from the kitchen, and the air began to hum with the quiet anticipation of order and ceremony. The servants themselves, though weary, found a kind of rhythm in this part of the day. The chaos of morning was gone. The hurried frenzy of afternoon had passed. Evening brought its own calm, not rest, but control. Every gesture mattered now. Every movement was refined. The footmen carried themselves with poised precision. The maid's steps were soundless, and even the scullery maid, cleaning the last pots below stairs, sensed the shift in energy. Above them, candles were lit in the hallways, their flames fluttering in the gentle drafts that whispered through the old walls. By the time the clock struck 7, the transformation was complete. The great house, which had begun the day in the cold shadows of dawn, now glowed with golden light, ready to play its part in the evening's quiet performance. The family would soon descend, their laughter echoing faintly across the marble floors, their guests greeted with warmth and charm. Yet behind every polished surface, every perfect detail, the invisible machinery of labor continued the unseen world that made the illusion possible. Outside, the last light faded from the garden, the roses dimming into silhouettes, the gravel path turning silver under the first hint of moonlight. Inside, the world held its breath for a moment, poised between day and night, between work and rest, between what was seen and what was hidden. The house, alive and glowing, seemed to sigh once more, as though acknowledging the balance that sustained it. It was evening in the Edwardian home, elegant, ordered, and quietly eternal. The hour of dinner in an Edwardian household was not merely a meal. It was a performance, the quiet theater of civility that defined the upper world. By the time the clock chimed 7, the great dining room shimmered beneath the steady glow of chandeliers. The light fell softly on polished silver, fine china, and crystal glasses that caught and fractured the light into tiny stars. The table stretched long and perfect, every fork and knife aligned like notes in a musical score. At the far end, a bowl of fresh flowers, lilies, and roses from the garden stood as the centerpiece. Their scent subtle yet deliberate, chosen to please without overpowering. The family entered in slow succession, each member dressed for the occasion as though for a portrait. The master lead, his movements deliberate, his expression calm. The mistress followed, graceful in her gown of mauve silk that shimmered faintly with every step. The children, if present, were quiet and well practiced. Seated at the far end of the table, under the gentle supervision of their governess, conversation began, not with enthusiasm, but with ritual, a measured exchange of pleasantries, the kind of refined small talk that sustained the illusion of harmony. A fine evening, the master might remark, and someone would answer softly, "Indeed, the roses were magnificent today." Nothing too deep, nothing too revealing. It was a language of gentility, meant more to fill the air than to express feeling. Behind the scenes, the servants moved like shadows in a dance of precision. The butler stood poised at the edge of the room, watching for the smallest signal, a raised eyebrow, a finished glass, a pause in conversation. The two footmen glided between the chairs, serving each course in perfect sequence. There was the soup, steaming gently in porcelain bowls, the fish, laid with delicate sauces, the roast, carved with practiced grace. Each dish arrived and disappeared as though by magic. The sound of silver spoons against china was the only rhythm permitted in this silent ballet. The cook, below stairs, waited with tense patience. She listened for the bell that signaled each course's return, her mind already on the next dish. The scullery maid worked quickly, washing, drying, preparing, unseen, unheard, yet essential. Every plate that gleamed upstairs bore the trace of her red, raw hands. In the dining room, the atmosphere remained serene. Even the fire in the grate seemed to burn more politely, its light steady, its warmth carefully measured. The mistress smiled occasionally, the corners of her mouth soft but controlled. The master spoke of business, of letters received, of friends visited. Every gesture carried meaning. How one held a fork, how one lifted a glass. The servants noticed these details, not as individuals, but as instruments of discipline. The butler, with quiet authority, kept the rhythm intact. His gloved hands moved gracefully, refilling glasses without sound, removing plates with a flicker of skill that made the action almost invisible. Outside, the night deepened. Through the tall windows, the garden shimmered faintly in moonlight, the last birds fallen silent. Inside, time seemed to stretch. The dinner would last an hour, perhaps more, until the final course dessert had been served. Then coffee would come, dark and fragrant, and the gentlemen might retire to the study for brandy and cigars, while the ladies moved to the drawing room for conversation. The servants would clear the table swiftly, efficiently, like stagehands erasing a scene before the next act. And as the echoes of laughter and polite talk faded down the corridors, the dining room would fall into silence again, the silver cooling, the candles burning low. It would be as though the performance had never happened, leaving only the faint scent of roses and roast in the air. A trace of elegance built entirely on invisible effort. After dinner, the Edwardian household divided itself with quiet precision, as though the great house itself inhaled and exhaled its occupants into their appointed spaces. The gentlemen, led by the master, retreated to the study, a room heavy with leather, smoke, and silence, while the ladies ascended to the drawing room, where conversation was lighter, laughter softer, and the air sweet with perfume and piano notes. It was the pattern of 1,000 evenings, familiar yet strangely timeless, as if the turning of the clock were part of the ritual itself. In the study, the air was warm and thick with the scent of tobacco and old books. A decanter of brandy caught the flicker of the firelight, its amber depths glowing like captured sunset. The master stood for a moment by the window, looking out over the darkened garden where the moonlight traced faint paths across the gravel. He said little, he rarely needed to. His guests, or sometimes only his eldest son, knew that this was not a room for noise, but for reflection. The crackle of the fire and the faint clink of glass were the only sounds permitted here. The men spoke in measured tones about politics, estates, the quiet machinery of business and power. Each sentence was deliberate, shaped not by emotion, but by etiquette. The servants entered silently when needed, refilling glasses, removing ashtrays, always unseen, always wordless. The butler moved with the calm assurance of habit, the keeper of the evening's rhythm. Meanwhile, above, the drawing room glowed like a separate world. Soft lamps cast warm halos of light over embroidered chairs and small tables scattered with letters and teacups. The mistress sat near the hearth, her gown catching the light with every subtle movement. Around her, conversation fluttered like gentle birdsong, talk of friends, fashion, gardens, and charity events. A young guest might play the piano, her fingers gliding softly over the keys, filling the air with a waltz or a sentimental song that seemed to suspend time itself. The ladies smiled, their voices never rising, their laughter no louder than the whisper of silk. The parlor maid entered now and then to refresh the tea, her expression polite, her steps barely audible over the music. She saw everything, the shimmer of jewels, the soft tilt of heads, yet she was seen by no one. It was not unkindness, but design. She belonged to the invisible part of the evening, the quiet machinery that kept beauty effortless. She would leave as discreetly as she came, closing the door with care so the latch made no sound. In both rooms, the firelight worked its quiet magic. In the study, it turned smoke into gold. In the drawing room, it deepened every color, the crimson of the curtains, the pale cream of the wallpaper, the faint glimmer of gold thread on a sleeve. Outside, the night pressed gently against the windows, the garden now a dark sea of shapes and shadows. The world beyond the house no longer mattered. Everything that existed was contained within these glowing rooms, these rehearsed conversations, this illusion of perfect control. And yet, beneath the surface, fatigue stirred like a quiet undercurrent. The servants below stairs worked still, washing dishes, clearing ash, preparing the trays for bedtime tea. Their world ran parallel to the refined quiet above, mirroring it in rhythm but not in rest. Even as the mistress smiled at her guests and the master poured another measure of brandy, the scullery maid scrubbed the last pan of the night, her reflection rippling faintly in the soapy water. By the time the clock struck 9, the house had reached its most elegant stillness. The music softened, the laughter faded, and the evening slipped gracefully toward its end. The candles burned lower, the fireside, and the grand illusion of calm perfection glowed, undelicate, practiced, and quietly exhausting. When the last notes of the piano faded and the laughter upstairs dissolved into polite good nights, the Edwardian household began its second shift, the hidden life of the night. The great house, glowing softly in lamplight, might have seemed to rest, but beneath its calm surface, the servants moved through quiet corridors like whispers of duty that never truly slept. Above stairs, the family prepared for bed. Below, the work began again. The kitchen was still warm from the day's fires, though the air had cooled and thickened with the faint smell of soap, bread, and ashes. The cook, exhausted but unyielding, took stock of the larder by candlelight. Each jar, tin, and basket was noted with the precision of habit. She murmured softly to herself, counting eggs, weighing flour, setting aside the cold remains of dinner to be transformed into tomorrow's breakfast. The scullery maid scrubbed the last pans, her hands raw from hours in hot water. She hummed faintly, not out of cheer, but to fill the silence. Around her, the clink of dishes and the rustle of cloth echoed off the stone walls, a music of labor that only the night ever heard in the butler's pantry. The butler himself made his rounds. He locked the silver cabinet, checked the cellar, and marked the wine ledger in neat, looping script. His movements were deliberate, his face expressionless, though fatigue sat behind his eyes like a quiet weight. For decades, this had been his rhythm, the day spent in vigilance, the night spent in order. He lived by the pulse of the house, bound to its duties as much as to its walls. Sometimes, in the quietest hour, he imagined what it might be like to walk outside the gate at night, to hear the gravel crunch beneath his shoes and keep walking, past the hedges, past the lamps, into the sleeping countryside. But imagination was a luxury, and he returned to his ledger instead, upstairs. The mistress sat at her vanity, hair unpinned, her lady's maid brushing it gently in long, silent strokes. The mirror reflected to women, but only one was meant to exist in the eyes of society. The mistress spoke softly, a reminder about tomorrow's visitors, a note about the flowers for the breakfast table. The maid listened, nodded, folded each word away as carefully as she folded the silk nightgown laid out on the bed. When her mistress finally dismissed her with a faint smile, she curtsied, backed away, and closed the door without a sound. Then she walked back down the servants' staircase, the heavy quiet swallowing her steps, her own night only just beginning. The housemaids worked by the glow of small lamps, tidying the rooms after their occupants slept. They moved like shadows, straightening draperies, folding garments, setting out clean water for washing. The faint creak of floorboards followed them down the halls. Even the smallest sound seemed magnified in the silence. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, carrying with it the smell of rain from the distant fields. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called once, a long, low note that melted into stillness. As the clock struck 10, the servants' corridor grew quieter. The kitchen fire was finally banked, the last plates dried and stacked. The scullery maid wiped her hands on her apron and stared at her reflection in the dark window, a face both young and tired, faintly ghostly in the candlelight. She turned away, snuffed out the flame, and followed the others to the narrow stairs that led to the attic rooms. By the time the great house settled into its midnight calm, every task had been completed, every sound softened. Only the tick of the clocks and the sigh of the wind remained. The house slept, but its stillness was alive, breathing through the quiet labor that sustained it, through the lives woven invisibly into its rhythm. The night belonged to them, if only for a few fleeting hours before dawn called them back again. By midnight, the great Edwardian house had fallen into that deep, layered quiet that only old places seem to know. Every room above stairs rested in its perfect stillness, curtains drawn, fires dimmed, clocks ticking with soft persistence. The long corridors were filled with the scent of candle smoke and polished wood, a faint perfume of yesterday lingering in the dark. The masters slept in their feathered beds, the weight of the day surrendered at last. But beneath them, through walls of stone and corridors of shadow, the remnants of work and weariness still whispered. The servants' world, tucked deep below, was never entirely silent. It breathed faintly through the rhythm of exhausted sleep in the attic rooms. The maids lay close beneath thin blankets, their small beds lined in perfect order, like pages in a forgotten book. The scullery maid dreamed of sunlight on water, of home far away, though even in sleep her fingers twitched, remembering the endless motion of scrubbing and carrying. The housemaids murmured softly to each other before drifting into silence. Their words, half-dreamed, half-remembered fragments of lives that belonged to another time. Somewhere down the hall, the lady's maid sat by her narrow window for a moment longer, brushing out her own hair after tending to her mistresses. The stars shone faintly through the glass, and for a brief instant, she allowed herself to imagine that she might one day stand beneath them freely, not merely glimpse them between the hours of duty below stairs. The last traces of the kitchen's warmth clung to the stone walls. The cook had finally gone to her bed, her apron folded neatly at the foot of it, her dreams filled not with rest but with lists of ingredients, menus, and morning preparations. The butler, ever precise, made one final circuit of the lower floor, checking locks, extinguishing lamps, making sure the silver cabinet's key rested in his pocket. His shoes made no sound against the floor as he moved. When he reached his small chamber at last, he paused before the mirror. The face that stared back at him was calm, lined, and tired, not unhappy, but long accustomed to stillness. He removed his gloves, set them carefully on the table, and allowed himself a slow breath before snuffing out his candle. Outside, the night pressed gently against the windows. The garden, once alive with voices and color, now lay drenched in moonlight, every leaf and petal silvered by the quiet. The gravel paths gleamed faintly, winding through the darkness like forgotten thoughts. An owl hooted from somewhere among the elms, and in response, the house seemed to sigh. The faint creak of beams, the soft shift of air through old halls. Even sleeping, the house was never truly still. It held within it the echoes of every footstep, every whisper, every bell that had rung through the day. Time in such a place did not move forward so much as it deepened, layer upon layer of routine, memory, and silence, each day folding into the next like sheets pressed and stacked in the linen room. The servants would rise again before dawn, as they always did. Fires would be lit, floors scrubbed, breakfast trays prepared. The masters would awaken to a world already perfect, unaware of the hands that shaped it while they slept. And so the cycle would continue, quiet, graceful, relentless, as it had for generations. In the final hours before dawn, the last lamp flickered and went out. The house, at last, was dark. For a few brief moments, there was nothing but stillness, a vast, gentle quiet that seemed to cradle every life within it. Above and below, all boundaries dissolved. The master and the maid, the mistress and the cook, the footman and the child, all of them were gathered under the same heavy roof, breathing the same slow rhythm of sleep. The house itself seemed to dream, not of change, but of continuity. The last light faded, and with it, the story of another Edwardian day came softly to its end.